Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
I was in third grade at Carl Sandburg Elementary School. It's a public school. And I remember going home and telling my mother about all the wonderful things I had learned in homeroom about Neanderthal man. Now, remember, I came out of an evangelical Bible literalist environment. And, what's not in the Bible is Neanderthal man. Well, my mother was horrified. And she determined right then that all of her children, all three of us still in the house, had to be plucked out of this satanic secular environment and placed in religious education. First stop, fourth grade, was Temple Christian School. Tiny little school with just a handful, I think we had a few dozen students, and it employed the ACE program, the Accelerated Christian Education Program, which is very, very, very culty, and it continues to influence today. Well, I followed the work of someone who has done years of investigative reporting on ACE, really exposing the damage done. I actually joined a Facebook page called Accelerated Christian Education Exposed. And I wanted to speak to someone heavily involved in that whole endeavor in exposing ACE. Jenna Scaramanga, thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Did you found that page? Are you the one who started the Facebook page?
I am, yeah. I started that when I was blogging really heavily about ACE, I guess like coming up for 10 years ago now.
Can you tell me about where the genesis of your interest in ACE came from? Were you indoctrinated?
I absolutely was. I think indoctrination is entirely the right word to use. I went to kindergarten in an accelerated Christian education school. We don't call it kindergarten in the UK, but that's what the program is. And then I went to a normal primary school. So the next kind of 6 years, I had a pretty standard education for this country. And then when I was 11, my parents took the decision to put me back into this hyper-evangelical environment. And I was there for like until I was 15, until I was just turning 15. So it was only a bit over 3 years that I was there as like a secondary school age kid, but it had a big, big impact on my life. And when I started to train to teach myself, I was training to teach music. Everything I learned about what good education is was just the opposite of what happened to me in that school. And I couldn't stop thinking about that. And I wrote a letter to a government agency about their endorsement of this curriculum. And I copied that letter to the Times Education Supplement, which is a newspaper for teachers in the UK. And I said, this curriculum taught me that the Loch Ness Monster exists and that is a reason to disbelieve evolution. I don't think that anybody should be endorsing this curriculum for any purpose, except possibly as an exemplar of what not to do. And then, that interest didn't really phase. So in 2013, I started a PhD on the experiences of students that have been to accelerated Christian education schools in England. And that finished in 2017. And during that time, I was doing a lot of activism type work as well. So it's been investigative as well, because I've spoken to lots of other people about their experiences, but it was primarily a personal interest.
It's interesting. It shows my ignorance because I thought this was primarily an American phenomenon, but they are in countries all over the world.
Yeah, they claim to be in 140 something countries. It's exported itself extremely well because, like a lot of cults, ACE had its charismatic leader, a guy called Donald Howard, who enthusiastically went to countries and campaigned extensively for his curriculum to be taken up, which other fundamentalist homeschooling curricula like the A. Becker book and BJU Press that some of your listeners who were homeschooled will be familiar with, that are doctrinally really similar to ACE, but they don't have really much of a presence outside of North America, as far as I'm aware. Whereas ACE has aggressively marketed itself in other countries. And the thing that ACE has going for it from that point of view is that it is designed to be teacherless. The curriculum is a series of self-instructional workbooks, and the children are meant to work through them individually and in silence in cubicles with vertical screens separating them from other kids if they're in a school or otherwise just at home. And all of the information that you need is contained within text within the workbooks. And then you do fill in the blank exercises almost exclusively in every subject. And then you go and mark your own work from a score key, check if you got the answers right. And you repeat that process until all the answers are right. And that is the entire system. The idea is that it's supplemented with some other things, but the curriculum itself, that's it. That's the whole thing. So you don't need qualified teachers for that. And you can have kids of all ages and different academic levels studying together in the same room. Like ACE's whole thing was that for just a couple of $1,000s, you can start a school, even if you have no experience, even if you don't know anything about education. And that has allowed ACE to spread into dozens and dozens of countries.
I remember our monitor, I don't know if we called her a teacher, was the principal's wife. And she did not have a college education. She had no educational background whatsoever. She just sort of walked around. She kind of trolled. You mentioned the partitions. Let me describe that for everybody. Ours were wooden, and they had a tiny little hole on the top where you would place an American flag. So if I'm in my PACE workbook and there's something that has vexed me, I take my flag and I stick it up in the little hole, and it's up hanging above my partition. And that would cause the monitor to show up and quote unquote answer my question. Was that an experience that you can relate to?
Yeah, that's universal. This is one of the things you'll find this with being in ACE Exposed, the Facebook group, is that regardless of where in the world you were schooled and when, like we have people that did this in the 70s and we have people that have finished within the last 5 years. And everybody has the same experience because ACE schools sign a contract with ACE to run their school according to these procedures as laid down by ACE. So the guy that founded it bragged about having designed this learning center, as he called it, and it replicating itself around the world. And that's absolutely true. As a campaigner, that's been frustrating trying to expose this because ACE contractually doesn't allow these schools to use the words accelerated Christian education in the name of the schools. They're not allowed to call themselves accelerated Christian education schools. They're only allowed to say they are schools that use the accelerated Christian education curriculum. So when something horrific happens at an accelerated Christian education school, like conversion therapy or a child being beaten to death, which happened a few years ago in New York State, or sexual assault, the news reports won't mention accelerated Christian education usually because why would they? Like, as far as the news reporters know, this is just the textbook publisher that the school uses, and you wouldn't, if you're writing a news story about a normal school, bother to say which textbook publisher the school used. But there's much more than a textbook publisher. They really are. It's a regime.
It sounds very much like IBLP, right? The Institute for Basic Life Principles, where a good parent has to beat the kid. I mean, if you don't beat the child, then you are, you're setting the child up for failure. It's a loving act. You say there was a child beaten to death. I can't let that go. Give me some specifics about that case.
Yeah, absolutely. So I talked about this in my PhD thesis. I mean, only based on news reports. I didn't do any first-hand research on this. It didn't happen in the school. It happened in the church. But the point of ACE schools is that the church and the school, the line between them is blurry or almost non-existent, really. They call them like church schools with a hyphen. And the idea is that the kid is in one completely consistent environment all the time, so that the same ideology is always being reinforced everywhere. They never are subject to any ideas that would kind of challenge their beliefs or contradict this belief system. And so, yeah, there was a church school set up that used accelerated Christian education in its schooling, but it was on a Sunday that the beating took place, as I understand it. Yeah, I might need to look this up and fact check myself, because I don't want to give any incorrect information, but I know that there were electrical cords were used. There was a group of adults. There were 2 brothers involved. One of them died. One of them was hospitalized with injuries. And at the time of the reports, was expected to recover. And I never saw any follow-up reporting after that. And yeah, it was just utterly a tragedy. And the schooling system has always endorsed corporal punishment. But obviously, it's always claimed to have a line between abuse and godly discipline. And in this case, that line was completely obliterated. And it's a fact that research shows that in the home, particularly, use of mild corporal punishment is a predictor of use of more extreme corporal punishment in the future, because the gentler, in inverted commas, the gentler corporal punishment stops working. Kids stop being afraid of it. It stops being a deterrent. And it's just not a very effective system of discipline. And so it can spin out of control like this. Yeah, it's just an extremely tragic case.
I want to get into some of the specific and very tragic, I was going to say lessons or, whatever they're selling as fact, the stuff they're teaching to children as fact. I want to get into that. You are familiar with the origins of ACE, Dr. Donald Howard and his wife. I mean, can you give us a primer on that, just in a nutshell? Where did this come from?
So, like pretty much all of the major fundamentalist homeschooling curricula, it has roots at Bob Jones University, which is like the bastion of Christian fundamentalism, really, in the world. And it was mostly notable to mainstream observers for the Supreme Court case in the 1970s, where they sued because they refused to integrate after it became illegal to segregate by race in universities. And they lost the upshot of that Supreme Court case was that they lost their tax exemption, but they chose to keep on segregating. In the 1960s, Bob Jones Sr., the founder of the university, said that the civil rights movement was not of God, it was of the devil. So this is the home of Christian white nationalism. And that's what ACE grew out of. Donald Howard got his doctorate from there. I have never seen his doctoral thesis, actually. That's a thing I'd be amused to read. In 1970, he founded a school, which he just had this idea for self-instructional curriculum. Initially, he photocopied some mainstream textbooks, like a chapter at a time, and created exercises. And that was the first kind of the beta testing phase. Second edition, by his own account, was riddled with errors. And then by the late 70s, they were introducing the third edition of those pages, which was the edition that, like most people that have been through ACE that are listening to this will have done, because they started introducing them in the late 70s and they started replacing them in like the 2000s. Like it was a long, long time that edition was in force for. And the fourth edition that's out now is materially pretty much unchanged. I published an academic paper about this earlier this year where we compared a load of them. And yeah, there was very strong similarities, especially in the lower grades. There were like entire pages where not a single word had been changed from the previous edition. So yeah, that's the roots of it, are like white nationalism and a weird belief in individualized education, which kind of goes with like a real belief in American individualism in general. I have this book that he wrote here. I thought you'd be interested to see this. I'll take a photo of this as well so you can put it on your website. But this is a diagram from inside his first book. It says Christian Americanism, and then there's two stylized stone tablets that clearly represent the 10 Commandments, and it says source, means, and end around them, which isn't really explained. And then below that says law, freedom, and limited government. So that's what Donald Howard believed. He was like a free market fundamentalist as well as a Christian fundamentalist, really, and believed that the principles that we now know as kind of the right-wing economics of the Republican Party were as much Christian values as any other belief that he held. And he thought that an education system needed to inculcate this. Absolutely. This was, of course, the 1970s. It was the height of the Red Scare as well. And so anti-communism was just through all of those workbooks. There was a real paranoia about the USSR and about the threat of communism in the United States. And this was a curriculum that was designed to stamp that out. We would be taught that free enterprise and low taxation were God's will, and that the more that you move away from that, the more anti-God you were.
Leading right into sort of the greedy 80s, the laissez-faire capitalism and the rugged individualist sort of, the propaganda of the Reagan era. I find that interesting. Back to racism, I had cut and pasted this, which was part of an ACE workbook. And it was talking about Nelson Mandela. You can correct me or speak to this. It said, although apartheid appears to allow the unfair treatment of blacks, the system has worked well in South Africa. Although white businessmen and developers are guilty of some unfair treatment of blacks, they turned South Africa into a modern, industrialized nation, which the poor, uneducated blacks couldn't have accomplished in several more decades. If more blacks were suddenly given control of the nation, its economy and business, as Mandela wished, they could have destroyed what they had waited and worked so hard for. Does that ring true for you, Jenna?
Yeah, absolutely. So that quote there, I think, is from a 1993 New York Times article where a black student in an ACE school had actually brought this to the attention of the media. I have never seen that workbook firsthand, but I did another one that was very, very similar in 1997. Like the wording was almost the same. And there was another one besides that. So the ACE have published at least 3 that I know about workbooks.
I mean, we're hearing this in Florida, in the USA, if you'll forgive the interjection. They're saying, well, slavery wasn't optimal. But I mean, think of the people who benefited and the life skills they learned under their masters. That rings familiar, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, in fundamentalist education more widely, like famously, there's an A. Becker textbook, which says that the Trail of Tears allowed many Native American people to get to know Jesus. So that's all good then. And yeah, very much like ACE's system is pro-colonialism and pro-imperialism. And they teach you absolutely explicitly that the reason the British Empire got so big was because Britain was a Christian country and God was on their side. And the reason for like international US military supremacy as well is because God is on our side. And when you do their geography course, it correlates, and they're quite open about this, it correlates the prosperity of nations with how Christian those nations are. Obviously, you have to be quite selective with the facts for that. You kind of gloss over Saudi Arabia and Ethiopia. But that is the position that if you are good, God will bless you. And also, they were from the off because the Christian day school, private day school movement really exploded after schools were integrated in the US. Like there's a very, very clear historical correlation that one of the major drivers was white flight. When black kids started going to the local schools, the white parents started taking their kids out of them. And the people that were promoting these curriculums knew of this reputation, and they were aware that it was like bad publicity for them. So they were trying to deny it. And the denials that appear I've got 2 books here. This one is by Donald Howard, who started the curriculum, and this one is by his vice president of ACE, Ronald Johnson. And they both contain denials of like the claim that ACE is racist. And Donald Howard says some ACE schools are segregated and some of them are integrated, and that's all good. Like he is really like, it's a choice for the schools whether to integrate or not, like a kind of a states' rights argument for schools is the way I think of that. And then Ronald Johnson's is just wild because he has an entire chapter which is called Christian Education is for Whites Only, or is it? And then the whole chapter is just slavery apologism. It's like, it has nothing to, it's a non sequitur. Like the question is Christian education for whites only? And his response is slavery wasn't so bad. And he starts going on about, East African Muslims have been enslaving black natives for hundreds of years before Columbus discovered America. It was not unusual for whites, browns, and yellows. Excellent language to use there if you want to prove to people you're not racist. Not unusual for whites, browns, and yellows to be sold to pay debts or to settle political disputes. Like his argument is that without Jesus, slavery is just one of those things that happens because humanity is inherently corrupt. But there was nothing especially bad about slavery in the United States or about European colonialism.
Okay, still to come, we got to talk about the dress code for ACE schools and what their quote-unquote science curriculum has to say about dun, 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 evolution. We'll talk about it next. I've got Dr. Jenna Scaramanga, former ACE student who escaped and has now been sounding the alarms about accelerated Christian education programs all around the world. I'm going to use 4 words here. I'm sure it relates to you. The big bad world. Everybody's out there. It's the scientists are all in league with each other. They want to kill God, and the communists are coming, and the foreigners are coming. And by the time I got out of there, I mean, I wanted to just crawl under a rock. And that was your experience? No? Yes?
Absolutely. I mean, the curriculum the entire idea of the system is if you send your kids to a mainstream school, they will be corrupted. The thing that I always think of in relation to that is that we were discouraged from having friends that weren't Christians, both by the whole point of sending us to this school, it was a little bubble, was that there wouldn't be non-Christians there to influence us to sin. But also in the paces, there were explicit messages of just you shouldn't hang out with non-Christians apart from when you're doing evangelism. And then, as you say, conspiracy theories galore. There's even ACE offered a college level, which is a joke, but a course that was supposedly college level or advanced placement on collectivism. And it has stuff about the Illuminati in it. It's proper, that level of conspiracy because it's inherently a conspiracist mindset. Donald Howard in his book views humanism as the big source of the conspiracy. And when he talks about humanism, he's kind of talking about humanism in the way that probably quite a lot of listeners to this podcast identify as humanist or at least sympathetic to humanism. And he's kind of talking about that he does refer to the American Humanist Association or the Second Humanist Manifesto and things like that. But it also is just a devil term for anything that he doesn't like in the way that now you would hear people talking about postmodernist Marxism or cultural Marxism or it's one of those terms that you can just use to slap a label on anything you don't like. He'll call it humanist. But the humanists were out to create world government, and this world government was going to destroy the family and end religion and destroy Christianity. And just everything in the world was scary and wrong and bad. And we had to be kept pure and clean and away from it.
All right. I'm going to describe my uniform, and I want you to describe yours. Was it red, white, and blue? I mean, were you dressed in the color? I'm trying to think in the UK what your colors might have been, because we look like little patriotic paper dolls. they had flags on my tie. I mean, describe your uniform.
Amazing. So I've never seen those US uniforms. I think you're talking about the ones that ACE did actually sell. It wasn't compulsory for schools to offer those, but there was a red, white, and blue uniform.
No, we had to either buy them or make them.
Oh,
in red, white, or blue.
But the design of them, I think, came from ACE Central. So we didn't have those, but they were, thinking about it, predominantly red, white, and blue. Yes, we had, because the Union flag is also red, white, and blue. So those are still patriotic colours here. The kids that were aged 11 and younger had red V-neck sweaters that they had to wear with a white collared shirt and a tie. For girls, it was an ankle-length kilt with a tartan design on it and tights and flat shoes. And for boys, it was grey trousers, or actually for the kids under 11, it was shorts all year round, like some weird Dickensian old public school fantasy. Bizarre.
It sounds like a Pink Floyd video, right? Where it's bizarre.
Yeah. Just for me, it was whiplash when my mum sent me to that school, because she used to talk about how that used to be a thing in British public schools. A public school, by the way, in the UK, really confusingly means extra posh private school. And what you think of as a public school is called a state school. But the elite schools in the UK used to make the boys wear shorts all year round because it was seen as a character building, will toughen you up, macho masculinity thing. And my mum used to talk about how cruel she thought that was. And then she sent me to this school that did that. And it was she had to backpedal really hard.
I was out in the parking lot. We had a basketball goal in the parking lot. We didn't have we were really on a shoestring, hardly any funding whatsoever. So it was kind of a small, cheap church building. It was actually at a church. And then we had a basketball goal in the parking lot. And I was out there in a dress shirt and slacks and shiny black dress shoes with all the other kids. And that's how we played at recess. We played basketball and tag and everything else, dressed for Sunday church. Did you have that?
Yeah, it was a similar thing. So you were actually at break times allowed to put on joggers if it was really cold. But yeah.
Wow, that's progressive.
Right.
You guys were really, really edgy.
Right. Praise the Lord. But absolutely that thing of it being on a shoestring, 100%. There were in 2017, there were a bunch of snap inspections of religious schools because actually in the wake of the Trojan Horse affair, which some of you will have heard the excellent New York Times podcast series on. But following that, there was a crackdown on religious institutions, and a bunch of ACE schools were found to be in violation of code in a whole bunch of ways, including a few of them that didn't have an adequate supply of hot and cold running water. And that's not a religious thing. That is just these schools have no money. They are tiny cults that are run on a shoestring, as you say.
Many in my audience are going to be wildly curious about just how bad the quote unquote education was. So let's start with the evolutionists. All right. I'm reminded actually of our new Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, who is aligned with the Creation Museum, Young Earth Creationism. They talk a lot about evolutionists, those evil scientists. Talk to me about creation evolution from your history in ACE, would you?
ACE was always like the most extreme end of the Young Earth Creationism because it was founded in Louisville, which is just outside Dallas. And not far from there is the Paluxy River in Texas, where creationists used to claim that there were footprints, like fossilized footprints of human footprints and dinosaur tracks alongside each other in the same rock, which they said blew evolution out of the water. And certainly would be an interesting finding if they could ever turn up the evidence. And Carl Bohr was a creationist from that neck of the woods who really persisted with the Paluxy tracks thing long after places like, people like Ken Ham and Answers in Genesis had gone, oh, actually, we're kind of embarrassing ourselves by continuing to claim that this is true because we haven't been able to substantiate it. But ACE was still fully fucking going for it. In fact, I have the latest revision of their curriculum here. And this is from...
This is a relatively new publication.
This is 2016, which by that standards, like they never revise anything. So that's really new. And in this, they kind of admit that the Paluxy tracks thing doesn't quite hold up. What do they say? Some creation scientists now advise against using the prints still remaining in the Paluxy River Valley as evidence concerning mankind and dinosaurs. But I think reading the whole text, what I would conclude if I read this as a student is that there were dinosaur tracks and human tracks fossilized in the same rock, but those tracks now have been destroyed and some of them turned out to be fakes, possibly a false flag operation. Like the bad evolutionists have covered this up. So we can't prove this anymore, but we used to be able to prove this. I think would be my kind of takeaway on that. As I mentioned at the top of the program, they taught me that the Loch Ness Monster existed, and that was a reason to doubt the theory of evolution. Carl Bohr had a bunch of theories that were just I just think stuff that he made up. He claimed that there was this vapor canopy around the Earth prior to the flood, which he wasn't alone in doing. And that's where the floodwaters came from. So there used to be a super greenhouse effect on the planet. So everywhere would have been a tropical environment because there was all this water vapor just floating around above the Earth somehow contained. And that all fell as rain during the flood. And that's why it's not there anymore. But he said that this made the sky pink and that it meant that there would be some kind of magic filter that would allow you to hear the stars singing in the morning because there's a Bible verse that refers to that. And he's like, that was literally true. You could actually used to be able to hear music coming from the heavens before the flood. And the pink sky thing, that was in a pace within the last 10 years. So some of the stuff I was able to kind of get them to quite negative publicity about. And some of those things have been removed from the new editions. But fundamentally, it's still at that extreme end of we think the Earth is 6,000 years old. We're not even going to talk about microevolution. It's the most extreme form of young Earth creationism.
It's a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy, but that's got to relate to the firmament, right? The waters of Earth separated from the waters of heaven. I've heard that. Yes, the waters
above and below.
Yeah. They used in the curriculum the old 747 in a junkyard, quote unquote, refutation for evolution, right? If a tornado went through a junkyard and assembled a 747, Oh, you
There
got
it
it.
Yeah, with a picture of the 747. You'll do that. This is 8th grade. This is their 8th grade science curriculum.
I'm struck by how the indoctrination spilled into every subject. I didn't just learn English. They would teach us phrasing of sentences, like, here's subject and predicate and adjectives and adverbs. But it was always framed around religious messages. When God created the trees, he did so because he wanted us to love the color green, that kind of thing. I mean, you noticed there's no escape.
No, and some of it's quite dark. Like, there's like a 6th grade English book where one of the sentences that you have to like underline the verb in is, in hell, the fires won't ever be put out. And like it comes up like 3 times within the same book. Like, that's strong stuff. Even in mathematics, I'm saying mathematics because saying math sounds weird to me and saying maths will sound weird to your listeners. But even in maths, you have to do Bible verses. You have to memorize a Bible verse and that will come up on the test and that will affect your grade. So potentially, and this is one of the criticisms that I made of ACE in my first paper that I published. Like, if you are like a college admissions tutor and you're looking at a graduating certificate from an ACE student, like, you don't know if their GPA is a bit subpar. Is it like, actually, they were a fairly decent student and they were crap at memorizing Bible verses, which is not relevant to the academic study at hand. You could drop a grade in maths because you failed to memorize Bible verses. And I just don't think that's fair.
I was looking at some of this. This is social studies. In regard to family, review the visualized instructions in sequence. And to describe daddy, they had protector, provider, leader, hero. Discuss mama's roles, such as helper, cook, cleans house, washes, and irons clothes. A very primitive view of the nuclear family.
That's in the kindergarten curriculum. Like, it is there from absolutely day one. And the other thing that's in the kindergarten curriculum, which I think about all the time, because I'm trans and I came out only a couple of years ago. So the majority of my activism was done before I came out. And I think back to that kindergarten because there was a dressing up box in my ACE preschool. And it was me and 2 girls. That was the whole class. And we always would, if we had free time to play, they would be like, we're playing mummies and daddies. You have to be the daddy. I always hated it. But it says in the instructions to the supervisors in those kindergarten classes, make sure that the kids only wear gender appropriate clothing. Like, make sure boys are not allowed to wear skirts and dresses and girls are not allowed to wear boys' clothes. Like, it was very, very explicitly like in bolded text in there as an instruction to the supervisors. And I don't have a clear memory of what happened at that time in my life, but I just like, did I express any interest in girl stuff then and have it slapped out of me? Because they would have come down on that extremely hard. I'll never know how much of an influence that was, but it was like that's what it's designed to do. One of the real, as you were talking about the big bad world earlier, like one of the big things is if you send your kids to a mainstream school, they're going to turn out queer. But if you send it to our godly Christian school, that won't happen. And people like me are evidence that doesn't work, but it does leave people like me with a fair bit of baggage.
A lot of people who have escaped fundy cultures still struggle with a whole bunch of damage done. So what happens next and where might they go? I'm going to talk to Dr. Jenna Scaramanga about this next. Talking here with Dr. Jenna Scaramanga. All right, I get email messages all the time from people who said, I got out, I graduated, I entered the world. I was a minnow. I had no idea what was going on. I went to college. What is this foreign planet? I was wrestling with the fact that I was the square peg who didn't fit into the round world, the real world. Real damage being done. We've got inhibited kids far behind the curve. They're not even playing catch up. They're still back here in an embryonic state, and they are thrown out into the world and trying to navigate. You want to speak to that? Were you that person?
Yeah, I was. Luckily, I got out when I was 15. So I did I moved midway through, I guess, the equivalent of 9th grade for you guys. And in the UK, you start preparing in that year for compulsory national exams that are called GCSEs. So I was able to get recognized qualifications on leaving school. And that meant I wasn't in the situation that most UK ACE grads are in, which is that they have a certificate for going through the ACE system that doesn't legally carry any weight in the UK system and which no one at university admissions office has ever heard of. So yeah, it could have been a lot worse for me. It was a difficult transition and I was behind in many ways, but I'm glad I did it then and not when I was older.
But in your research, I know you've heard the stories, you've crossed paths, you've interviewed people who just got fucked up by ACE, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think about my participants a lot. I had 2 participants that had spent time in psychiatric institutions, and I had others that had dropped out of university because they didn't feel able to cope when they were there or had struggled through university. I think the trauma of it as well is a thing that stays with you for a long time after it. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, but I had a participant who was bi, and she said that she'd had an opportunity to have a girlfriend and she'd really liked that person and really wanted to start that relationship, but she hadn't felt able to because there was a voice in her head that told her that this was unnatural and that she'd go to hell if she did. And she knew that wasn't rational, but she still couldn't stop herself from acting on it. And that kind of trauma response, that takes a lot of work to get out of. And even when you've learned, rationally speaking, that that's wrong, it stays with you. It's like these really formative experiences. They're hard to overcome.
Is there a resource you direct people to for those who are still scarred or maybe have open wounds? You know, we talk about religious recovery, religious trauma. Some people don't think that religious trauma is a thing. And I'm like, you have no idea, right? I mean, people are often traumatized. It's a thing, right? You'd agree with me. Back me up here, Jenna.
100% that's a thing. Yeah, absolutely. I wish I'd used trauma more in my doctorate as a framework for understanding these things, because now I think that is the most useful way to understand it. And I also wish I'd done
resource though? I mean, is there a place that you direct people, maybe even your own page on Facebook about ACE?
Absolutely.
I don't know.
So ACE Exposed can be quite a validating place, and we welcome new members. And there's a private group which I vet people a bit more carefully, so it's a bit more of a safe space, which also exists, which once having joined the main group, if you message me, then you can join that one too, potentially. And I guess that book, Leaving the Fold, who is the therapist who developed this this term religious trauma syndrome, she has done the most work because that work came out of fundamentalist Christianity. Marlene Winnell. That is a useful resource. I'm glad you asked me this question. I want to do more. For a long time, my activism was focused on, I'm going to take ACE down. And I realized what a giant task that was after I've been trying to do it for like 5 years and getting nowhere. And I realize now that the best thing that we can do is support each other. And what I really want to do is to support the other survivors. Speaking of which, if I may give a shout out to some other people whose work I think is really important. There's a podcast called Legacy of Abuse. And there is a group of former ACE schoolers in Saskatchewan, Canada, who are suing their former school for neglect and for sexual abuse. And there are also legal cases ongoing, and they have new people joining their lawsuit all the time. And they're also chronicling this in Legacy of Abuse. It can be a difficult listen because it's a lot of people recounting their trauma, but it's if you want to feel heard, if you want to feel not alone, and if you want to know what these people have been through, then that's a great podcast to listen to.
That's something I might be interested in, having a conversation with those hosts, maybe here. If they were ever interested, I might throw a feeler out and see where they're at.
Yeah,
I have a fantasy. Actually. I don't think this is petty. I think it's more of a liberation exercise. But I fantasize that, Temple Christian School, which I think is now defunct, but they have a reunion and I get to go back. I would love to have a conversation. I would love to say, all right, look, here's who I am. Here's where I am. And, you didn't win. I don't know if is that petty, Jenna, to think along those lines?
I mean, no, I think that, certainly I've fantasized about encounters with my old teachers many times. And I had so many nightmares for so many years, mostly about confronting them and then finding that I couldn't speak, or that my mouth was sealed shut, or that my jaw was so tight that I could barely speak, or my voice would come out as a whisper. Just really not at all subtle. I felt like I had no voice dreams, barely even metaphors. And since doing some activism on it, I don't have those nightmares anymore. But certainly the idea of confronting them, I'd still have a lot to say to them now. In fact, I did. My family were quite close friends with the people that ran my school, and I wrote them a letter, and I was like, "What the fuck?" And I got quite a gaslighty response, but I've still got it. Yeah.
Oh, it's your fault. You've strayed from the path, kind of a thing, or I mean, don't let me pry. But
lots of I brought up some very specific instances of things that I thought were unacceptable that happened while I was at the school, and there was lots of going, "Oh, I'm not sure if we can ever agree on that based on different recollections of past events and stuff like this." It's interesting. They didn't deny it. They didn't actually quite go as far as saying that I was lying or making it up, but they wouldn't admit that they'd done it either.
Beyond all of the exposing of the bad ideas, I really do appreciate the human aspect of what you do, creating a support and encouragement network for those who've been harmed.
Thank you so much. If I can make a possibly cheeky request, I don't think anyone's going to take me up on this, but I blogged on Patheos for years, and as you possibly may have heard, the evangelical company BeliefNet that owns the Patheos blogging network, when all the atheist bloggers left a few years ago, they were not as cooperative as they could have been about giving everyone their old blog archives. And in fact, I was not active at the time and mine just got deleted. So loads of my articles just don't exist anymore. They've just been wiped from the net. But they are in the Wayback Machine. They're in the web archive. So if anyone wanted to do me an enormous solid, if you could help me archive my old blog and restore it to the internet, that would be amazing, because there's probably hundreds of articles that I wrote about ACE that are not destroyed, but you can't find them on Google anymore.
I read about that. Hemant Mehta and a few other people were blogging on Patheos, and then this religious organization came in and just decided we're going to do nothing controversial, and they're obviously going to lean less secular and less religious criticism. They just dumped everything that you had been doing. They just deleted it outright.
Yeah. So what happened was that I hadn't blogged for a couple of years. So I wasn't, when all of those bloggers went off and formed Only Sky together, I wasn't really party to that because I wasn't doing anything. And then I contacted Patheos after that happened and said, "Can I have my blog archive, please?" And they were like, "No, we've deleted it."
All right. So if people are finding the articles, let's say I've got some people who can go in and spider web out. Where would they send those? How would they contact you? What's the best method for that?
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. I'm not super active on social media right now. I guess I'm going to just give out my email address. And if I start getting shit on that, then I'll have to start using a different email address.
I don't want to set you up for that. I mean, let's do this. I'll put it in the description box if we decide at the end, or I'll put a link to maybe one of your pages, and that way you're not on the
I guess
hook.
my Instagram, message me on Instagram. That'd be cool. Instagram isn't super active, but I do check it regularly.
Okay, I'll link that as well in the description box. By the way, I love the word cheeky. In the UK, you have such great sayings. I learned one. This is total digression. I was watching a show the other day, and something bad had happened, and she said, "Well, that's a bag of pants." I had no idea what they were talking about, so I had to go look up. Apparently, pants in the UK is when something is shit or it's bad, like it's pants. Is that, do you say pants?
I haven't said pants for a while, but it's definitely a thing that I have said in my life and that people do say. Because obviously pants to us are underpants. If we say pants, we're talking about underwear.
Wait, pants are underpants, then what are pants? What are your over the
trousers.
Larger pants? They're trousers. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, for the record, ACE is a big bag of pants. And I just want that on the record. Jenna Scaramanga, all the links in the description box. Thanks again. Great talking to you.
And you, thank you so much.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.